Nikoline and I are the founding partners, also a private couple, in what we call Spacon and X, Copenhagen-based architecture and design studio. And to take you back to 6 years ago, Nikoline was working at a traditional architecture's office. I was working in advertising with a background in fashion. And, you know, advertising and fashion was great. It also entailed that you would sometimes have to turn your blind eye to some of the long-term consequences of your work, which are sometimes leading to like a very short-term consumerism. And as for Nikoline's case, this is something that I would argue very much at the time. She was in an architecture studio, very competition-driven, and to me that was just like little to no dialogue with the client in the process where you'd come up with a meaningful solution. Then this solution would be validated in a circle of academics. After that being built by people who essentially hate architects, and you just end up with a product years down the road which will disappoint the actual users of the space. So we had a lot of discussions about what we were doing and why we were actually turning our kids into to kindergarten in the morning and just going to work, and it was great fun, but we'd just come home and be a little bit like have our kids pick up our parents pick up our kids every day because we work too much. So we basically decided to quit our jobs, and we set out to find out how to be really amped about going to work every morning, and then be really proud about coming home every night. So what we did actually was we coupled the more short-term human-centered approach that we were used to from architecture and advertising in my case, with a more like long-term humanity-centered approach. And basically, the starting point was this situation that we were living in an apartment, and we had one child, we had another child on the way, and we were kind of running out of space in this apartment, so we started out just in front of our noses with this situation, and started out basically with the 100% personal investment, quitting our jobs and saying like, we start from the first step basically. And then we went into looking at how could we combine ideas of what we were used to working with and playing around a little bit in the space. And then from that, we kind of designed a new life for ourselves where we could combine our expertises to also make a living from what we were doing. And this, you know, in the beginning it meant just in terms of the blurred space. I mean, we have one room here, which is the kids' room and also our office at the time. And I mean, some of it worked. You know, the office worked until we had the first employee, and we just started thinking about what if someone gets sick and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So that was the kind of starting point, and we called what we were doing spatial conversion and cross-functionalism, or in short, Spacon and X.
Yes, and in Spacon and X, cross-functionalism has at least two meanings. One is the more traditional meaning of crossing disciplines, just like when Svend and I merged our different backgrounds, our different competences, our different energies and views on problems and our different solutions to those problems. That we will get into more a little later. The other level is what we refer to here as cross-functionalism part 1. Is the belief that in order to make the most out of the limited space we have in our growing cities all over the world, we aim to create solutions to facilitate more than one key activity that defines the space. So in the case of our apartment that Svend just talked about, we started out experiencing a lack of space, having our second child on the way, and we were like starting to looking about, we have to move because we need an extra children room. But playing with cross-functionalism, flexibility, changed our focus into hey, what else can we put into this space? Climbing walls, slides, and how can we make a lot better use of our square meters and cubic meters? Thinking in cross-functional and flexible solutions. We also found that in our culture, we have a very monofunctional way of thinking about space. Each room is often located for one function, one activity. A bedroom is for one bed to sleep in. You sleep, in average, not more than 8 hours. So the rest of the time, those square meters would be dead square meters. So moving away from a monofunctional way of thinking about our space, and a very product-based also way of thinking about how to furnish and inhabit space, moving more into a more like multifunctional and an activity-based way of thinking about our square meters, our home, and our use of space, actually made it possible to cut down our square meters into half, which is an exercise we have done in a lot of different situations, that it leaves us a lot more room for playing around and a lot better use of the square meters. So this kind of thinking is a very human-centered approach. What is our needs? What do we want? And how can we create and facilitate for those human-centered approaches? This is something that made a lot of meaning for us. But how does that lead into a humanity-centered approach? So we could not only be amped about going to work, but also proud of coming home to our kids, focusing on what it does for the world. And well, at the moment, in Copenhagen, like any other capital, in the rapidly expanding. People are moving towards the cities. And the problem is that the developers in most cities tend to seek profits by targeting a very specific family type, which is the family type with above average income. And this essentially gives us very homogenic cities. And meanwhile, there are 37 officially registered different family types, just alone in Copenhagen. So where is the room for the 36 else to live? And through that is where we found out that we could use cross-functionalism as a weapon to fight diversity, something that we found really important.
Fight for diversity, right?
Fight for diversity.
Just when I agree with you on this.
Fight for diversity, which is something that we found is super essential and very important in cities growing with the rapid speed as they are today in urban areas. This project that you see up here is actually from the same buildings as you saw on the previous picture, an example of a homogenic development. These apartments was built by a huge Danish pension fund, targeted at families with one child and significantly above average income, household income. And their problem was that while targeting the most profitable tenants that seemed about right to go for that nice market, they were oversaturating a very specific slice of the market. So they were simply not able to rent out their apartments. They called us basically to sprinkle some freshness on the apartments. But what we did instead was to open up the neighborhood to diversity by making apartments suitable and flexible for other family types through cross-functional interior solutions. So up here is one apartment made flexible for a family situation of step families having, for example, 3 children in 1 week and no children in the other week. They could find the flexible space in the same apartment as was before targeted for only 1 kid family Down here is an example of one of the apartments which was transformed into meeting the need of a single mom with a son moving together with her mom that was alone. Another way of creating solutions to help diversity thrive is by thinking of architecture as platforms for social interaction. The tendency in Copenhagen is to max out the private units in residential buildings and then shrink all common areas. Luckily, we work with very visionary clients who believes the opposite to be more healthy for our cities. And like in this community living project in Copenhagen, where the concept of compact private units liberates space for upgraded shared spaces, which is soon to be completed. And we have worked with these principles on all scales within design and architecture in the last 5 years. And across the scale, completed almost 200 projects today, over 5 years. We just made a short show reel to give you a quick visual bombardment of our projects and how we work cross-functionally. We could have showed you our entire portfolio, but this is a 2 minutes run through. I hope the sound is on.
It's a challenge,
it is.
Really looking forward to it.
It's very silent.
It's very silent. Can you turn up the sound?
There's actually a quite cool soundtrack to this, but you just have to imagine.
You have to imagine.
Just imagine cool music in your ears right now. And,
Yes.
I hope the music was as cool as what you imagined before the actual music came on. Well, this takes us to the second version of what we refer to as cross-functionalism, which is again how we started out with very different backgrounds and expertises, and we just found a really strong dynamics in that, because it made us, every time we would present an idea, we would have to sell it, not only by saying, like, this is how it's done in the industry and this is how everyone else does, but this is the perfect solution to this problem because such and such. So, of course, naturally, we wanted to extend this dynamics to a recruitment structure in our company. So, of course, we have a lot of architects. We're, I think, in some cases, legally obliged to have architects. And we have spatial designers, and then it gets a little bit more fun. But then we also have a sculptor, an anthropologist, an experienced economist who is currently working as our COO, a design engineer, and a jewelry designer. And this gives us the ability to, when starting up on a project, to make a team out of, like, an architect and an anthropologist and a sculptor, for example, to have very different perspectives thrown into the pile, and you sort of have to sit there together and solve a problem, basically as the human beings you are, only to later apply your expertises and, of course, throw them in the pile as well. So of course, this is something that it really motivates. We find very radical ideas and thoughts, and a very sort of disruptive approach. But at the same time, it demands some amount of empathy and diplomacy. So we actually like to speak of ourselves as disruptomates, because on the one hand, we'd like to disrupt. On the other hand, we'd like to, empathetically look into the problem and the organization we're working with and try to figure out how to make this idea stick. So this works both on a teamwork level between us, but it also works when working with bigger organizations. In order to make this work, we also have this this term that we call dumbfidence at the office, and it's actually to create and maintain this environment where you can you feel confident to present dumb ideas and ask dumb questions, because in our belief, there's nothing more toxic to a creative environment than the fear of making mistakes. And also, a lot of times, like the best ideas come from the dumb ideas. Like in this case, this is an example where IKEA kitchen and dining department came to us because they wanted just an idea catalog about how to solve this problem to them, that there was a tendency that people in urban areas tend to just give up the idea of cooking and dining in their homes entirely. And of course, that's a problem to them. To us, it was a problem because there's really strong social components in sharing a meal and cooking at home that we wanted to maintain. So the dumb idea here was to seek inspiration in smoking. And I mean, in 2019, that's kind of... we just thought it was fun to do also because you have like a very politically correct organization, and we'd like to see this IKEA guy smoking a cigarette. But why did we do it? We did it basically because smoking, like cooking and dining, is a very social activity, but no one gives up smoking because of lack of time and space. So how could we essentially make cooking and dining or sharing a meal a little bit more like smoking? So what we did was we tested this out, and here we have Nikoline with our engineer Victor and Peter, our constructing architects, and then we have the sculptor Oscar eating lunch basically in the courtyard like he would normally smoke a cigarette. And then we tried it out in the printing room just to try it out with very limited space. So from that came the concept of dinnerware-free dining. And the idea was to make this cookbook about how to cook food that didn't require dinnerware, and also to create this hub called Eldstad, which means like fireplace in Swedish. And it's a little bit inspired by a fireplace where you can cook and eat all in one go. So essentially cutting down a lot of time in the process of cooking and eating, but still maintaining the important part, as we saw it, which is the social moment that you could have with a neighbor just randomly or with a friend you invite over. So that's an example. So trying to sum up this whole approach of cross-functionalism, we have on the short-term goal, the more human-centered approach, we try to create multifunctional solutions facilitating key activities which define a space, as Nikoline showed before. And then we always try to compose teams of different perspectives to crush internal logics, which we see as blocking to creating new ideas to new problems. And on the long-term goal, as Nikoline also showed us before, we try always to make solutions that contribute to a thriving diversity in our cities. So that's the long and the short of it. Thank you very much for listening in.
Thank you.